Mafia boss rushed into the hospital room. Furious froze as he sighted his ex-wife with newborn triplets. "I swear to God, Olivia, if you think you can keep my children from me," Dominic's voice cut through the hospital room like a blade, but the words died in his throat as his eyes fell on the 3 tiny bundles. His ex-wife, pale and exhausted, cradled one infant while 2 more slept nearby. "Triplets?" he whispered, his fury evaporating into shock. "Why didn't you tell me?" Olivia's eyes, filled not with fear but with a strange relief, met his. "Because I knew you'd come back into my life, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to let you leave again." Have you ever wondered what happens when the most dangerous man in the city discovers he's become a father overnight? Not to 1 child, but 3? And the woman who kept this secret is the only person he's ever truly loved, and the only one who ever walked away? This is a story about power, protection, and the kind of love that forces even the hardest hearts to surrender. If you've ever had to choose between the life you built and the love you lost, you'll want to stay until the very end. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed overhead as Dominic Valenti stormed through the corridor, his Italian leather shoes striking the linoleum with thunderous purpose. Nurses flattened themselves against walls as he passed, his security detail, 2 stone-faced men in dark suits, following 3 steps behind. Dominic's jaw clenched so tight he could feel a muscle twitching beneath his 5 o'clock shadow. 36 hours without sleep had left dark circles under his eyes, but the fury burning within him provided all the energy he needed. "Room 307, his right-hand man, Leo, murmured from behind. Dominic didn't acknowledge the information. He already knew where he was going. The text message that had dragged him from an international summit in Geneva had burned itself into his memory. "Your children have been born. 3 of them. Olivia needs you. Children. Plural." His children with the woman who had walked out of his life 11 months ago, claiming she couldn't bear the weight of his world any longer. The woman who had filed divorce papers he'd refused to sign. The woman who had disappeared so completely his best investigators couldn't locate her. Until today. He reached the door, hand hovering over the handle. For the first time since receiving the message, doubt crept in. What would he say to her? What could possibly bridge the chasm that had formed between them? But these were his children. His blood. And no force on earth would keep him from them. He pushed the door open without knocking, prepared to unleash the full force of his rage, at being kept in the dark, at being denied knowledge of his own children's existence until this moment. The words died in his throat. Olivia lay propped against white hospital pillows, her copper hair swept into a messy bun, face pale with exhaustion but glowing with a serene beauty that stole his breath. In her arms, she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in pink. To her right, a clear hospital bassinet held 2 more swaddled infants, one in blue, one in yellow. "Dominic," she whispered, her green eyes widening. Not with fear, as he might have expected, but with something like relief. The fury that had propelled him across continents evaporated, replaced by a sensation he couldn't name, something vast and terrifying in its intensity. "You came," she said, voice cracking. He stepped into the room, signaling Leo to remain outside. The door clicked shut behind him. "You hid this from me," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the storm raging inside him. "My own children." Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I didn't know they were triplets until my 5th month. By then." She trailed off, glancing down at the infant in her arms. "By then what?" he demanded, moving closer despite himself, drawn by an irresistible need to see the faces of these tiny humans who carried his bloodline. "By then I was afraid," she admitted. "Not of you. Never of you. But of them." She nodded toward the door, toward the world beyond, the world of enemies and rivals that had always threatened to consume them. Dominic reached the bedside, looking down at the infant in her arms. A perfect, miniature face, eyes closed in peaceful sleep, rosebud lips slightly parted. Something cracked open inside his chest. "This is Sophia," Olivia said softly. "The boys are Marco and Gabriel. His children. 3 of them. Born while he'd been negotiating territory disputes and supply chain issues, oblivious to the miracle taking place." "Why now?" he asked, unable to tear his gaze from Sophia's sleeping face. "Why tell me now?" Olivia's composure faltered. "There were complications. The doctors." She swallowed hard. "I need help, Dominic. I can't protect them alone." The implication hung heavy between them. She hadn't called him because she'd forgiven him or because she wanted to reconcile. She'd called because, despite everything, she knew no one could protect their children like he could. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to Sophia. Surprise flickered across Olivia's face, followed by a tentative smile. She nodded, carefully transferring the bundle into his arms. Dominic Valenti, feared leader of the most powerful syndicate on the East Coast, stood frozen as 7 pounds of newborn settled against his chest. Sophia squirmed slightly, then relaxed, somehow recognizing the safety of her father's embrace. "She has your eyes," Olivia said. "They all do. That same intensity." He looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze. "You should have told me." "Would it have changed anything?" she asked, the question hanging between them like a challenge. Before he could answer, Marco began to fuss in his bassinet. Olivia reached for him, wincing as she shifted position. "You're in pain," Dominic observed, noticing for the first time the 4-line in her arm, the monitors tracking her vitals. "Emergency C-section," she explained, settling Marco against her. "The third one, Gabriel, was breech. They couldn't wait." Dominic's security training kicked in automatically, assessing threats, vulnerabilities. Olivia, weakened from surgery. 3 helpless infants. A public hospital with minimal security. "We need to move you," he said. "All of you. Tonight." Olivia shook her head. "The doctors won't discharge us yet. The babies need monitoring." "I'll bring the doctors to us," he countered, already formulating plans, making mental lists of what would be required. "My estate in the Berkshires. It's isolated, defensible. I can have a medical team there within hours." If you're enjoying this story about how a powerful man's world was turned upside down by 3 tiny miracles, hit that like button and subscribe to Serafina's stories for more captivating tales that will touch your heart. Now, let's continue with Dominic and Olivia's journey. "Dominic," Olivia sighed, "this is exactly why I left. You can't control everything." "I can protect what's mine," he said, the words emerging more fiercely than intended. Olivia's expression hardened. "They're not possessions, Dominic. They're people. Tiny, vulnerable people who need more than security details and bulletproof windows." Sophia stirred in his arms, her tiny fingers escaping the swaddle to curl around his thumb. The sensation, those impossibly small fingers gripping his with surprising strength, silenced whatever retort he'd been forming. "What do they need, then?" he asked quietly, humbled by the perfect being in his arms. Olivia's expression softened. "They need a father who sees them. Really sees them. Not as extensions of himself or his legacy, but as individuals with their own paths." "Like you needed," he said, understanding dawning. She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I couldn't bear the thought of raising them in a world where their value was measured by their usefulness to the family. Where love came with conditions." The words struck Dominic like physical blows, each one exposing a truth he'd spent years avoiding. He looked down at Sophia, then at Marco in Olivia's arms, and finally at Gabriel, still sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. 3 lives entrusted to his care. 3 futures waiting to be written. His mind drifted back to 11 months ago, to the night everything fell apart. The night Olivia had walked away. It had been raining, one of those relentless summer downpours that turned the city streets into rivers. He'd come home late, as usual, clothes spattered with blood that wasn't his own. A rival had made a move against one of their shipping operations. The response had been swift, brutal, and necessary. He'd found Olivia sitting in the dark of their penthouse living room, a single lamp casting long shadows across her face. She hadn't turned when he entered, hadn't acknowledged him at all. "It's done," he'd said, loosening his tie. "Marconi won't be a problem anymore." "And the next one?" she'd asked, her voice hollow. "And the one after that?" He'd poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, irritation prickling under his skin. "There's always a next one, Liv. You know that." She'd finally turned to face him then, and the emptiness in her eyes had stopped him cold. "I found out something today," she'd said. "What?" "I'm pregnant." The glass had nearly slipped from his fingers. We're having a baby?" "And I realized," she continued as if he hadn't spoken, "that I can't do this anymore. I can't bring a child into this life." "Our life," he'd corrected, setting down his drink, moving toward her. "Our child." She'd stood then, backing away from his approach. "No, Dominic. Your life. Your world. I've been living in it, but I've never been part of it." "Not really." "That's not true," he'd argued, anger rising to mask the fear her words had triggered. "Everything I've built for us." "Have you?" she'd challenged. "Or have you built it for yourself, for your father's approval, for your family's legacy? When was the last time you asked what I wanted?" "You have everything," he'd snapped. "Security, luxury, my name." "Your name," she'd interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping her. "The Valenti name. Do you know what that means to the rest of the world? Do you know what people whisper when I walk into a room? 'There goes Dominic Valenti's wife. Don't cross her or you'll end up in the harbor.'" "I've given you respect," he'd insisted. "You've given me fear," she'd countered. "People fear me because they fear you. That's not respect, Dominic. That's not love." "I love you," he'd said, the words awkward on his tongue. He rarely said them, had always believed actions spoke louder. "I know you do," she'd said, her voice softening. "In your way. But your way isn't enough anymore. Not for me, and certainly not for our child." She'd walked past him then, toward the bedroom. He'd grabbed her arm, more roughly than he'd intended. "You're not leaving," he'd said, a command rather than a request. She'd looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. "That's the problem, Dominic. You think you can control everything, the city, your enemies, me. But you can't. Some things have to be freely given." "Olivia." "I've already packed," she'd said. "I'm staying with my sister tonight. After that, I don't know." "You can't take my child," he'd said, desperation making his voice harsh. "Watch me," she'd replied, pulling free of his grasp. "File for divorce, Dominic. Let me go. It's the only way either of us will ever be free." He hadn't believed her. Hadn't believed she would actually leave. Olivia had been part of his life since college, the beautiful art history major who'd seen past his family name, who'd loved him before he'd taken over the family business, before he'd become the man his father had groomed him to be. But she had left. And when he'd finally accepted she wasn't coming back, when he'd sent his men to find her, she'd vanished. Her sister claimed not to know where she'd gone. Her friends, her job, all abandoned. For 11 months, he'd searched. For 11 months, he'd refused to sign the divorce papers her lawyer had sent. For 11 months, he told himself it was about the child, his heir, his blood. But in truth, it had always been about her. Now, standing in this hospital room with his daughter in his arms, Dominic finally understood what Olivia had tried to tell him that night. Control wasn't love. Possession wasn't protection. I never signed them, he said suddenly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. What? Olivia asked, confused. The divorce papers. I never signed them. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I know. Not because I wanted to control you, he continued, needing her to understand. But because I couldn't imagine a life where you weren't my wife. Olivia's eyes searched his face, looking for the truth behind his words. But you never came after me. Not personally. I sent my best men. You sent men, she interrupted. Not yourself. Dominic shifted Sophia in his arms, careful not to wake her. I thought you didn't want me to find you. I didn't, she admitted. And I did. That's the problem with loving someone like you, Dominic. Everything is complicated. Gabriel stirred in his bassinet, tiny fists waving in the air. Dominic moved to him, peering down at his second son. Unlike his siblings, Gabriel was awake, dark eyes blinking up at the world with a solemn curiosity that seemed impossible for a newborn. May I? Dominic asked again, nodding toward Gabriel. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. You'll need to put Sophia down first. With a gentleness that would have shocked his associates, Dominic carefully placed his daughter back in her bassinet. Then, with even greater care, he lifted Gabriel into his arms. The boy was smaller than his sister, more fragile seeming. He was the fighter, Olivia said, watching them. The doctors were worried about him. His heart rate kept dropping during labor. Dominic felt his own heart constrict. But he's okay now? They think so. They want to monitor him for another day or two. Gabriel's tiny hand found Dominic's finger, just as Sophia's had, and something profound shifted in Dominic's chest. These weren't just his heirs. They weren't extensions of himself or his legacy. They were miracles, 3 separate, perfect miracles who deserved more than the life he'd built. I would have come myself, he said quietly, eyes still on Gabriel, if I thought there was any chance you'd see me. Olivia adjusted Marco against her shoulder, patting his back gently. I was so angry with you. For so long. I know. Not just for who you are or what you do, she continued. But for never giving me a choice. For assuming I'd accept your world because I accepted you. Dominic looked up, meeting her gaze. And now? She sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion and emotion. Now I have 3 children who need their father. Who deserve to know you, the real you, not just the legend or the monster the papers make you out to be. I'm not sure there's much difference anymore, he admitted, the confession costing him more than she could know. There is, she insisted. I've seen it. I wouldn't have fallen in love with a monster, Dominic. A nurse entered then, clipboard in hand, momentarily startled by the sight of Dominic holding the baby. She recovered quickly, professional mask sliding into place. Time for vitals, she announced, moving to check Olivia's foreign monitors. And the little ones need their checkups too. Dominic reluctantly placed Gabriel back in his bassinet, stepping back to allow the nurse access. He watched as she efficiently checked each baby, making notes on her clipboard, her movements practiced and gentle. "They're doing wonderfully," she told Olivia with a smile. "Dr. Patel will be in shortly to discuss discharge plans for you and Sophia. The boys might need another day or two." After she left, Dominic moved to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. His city, or so he'd always thought of it. From this height, the streets looked like arteries, the buildings like organs of some vast living entity. An entity he'd spent his life trying to control. "I can't change who I am overnight," he said without turning. "I can't walk away from the family, from the business." "I never asked you to," Olivia replied softly. He turned, surprised. "Didn't you?" She shook her head, wincing slightly as she adjusted her position. "I asked you to see me. To see that I needed more than just security and luxury. To understand that I wanted a partner, not a protector." "And now?" he asked again. "Now I need both," she admitted. "A partner and a protector. For them." She nodded toward the triplets. "But I need to know that you see them as people, Dominic. Not as possessions or pawns or extensions of your empire." He moved back to the bedside, taking in the sight of his family, his wife, his children. The word felt strange, foreign almost. Family. He'd always had family, his father, his brothers, his cousins. But this was different. This was something he'd created, not something he'd been born into. "When I got your text," he said slowly, "I was in the middle of negotiations with the Bratva. Territory disputes in the Harbor District." Olivia tensed visibly. The Russian Mafia had been encroaching on Valenti territory for years, a constant source of bloodshed and tension. "I walked out," Dominic continued. "Left Viktor Sokolov and his men sitting at the table. Told Leo to book the first flight back, no matter the cost. They'll see that as weakness," Olivia said, revealing how much she still understood about his world despite her absence from it. "I don't care," Dominic replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. In that moment, nothing mattered except getting to you. To them. He gestured toward the babies. "And now that you're here? Now I'm wondering if there's a way to have both," he said honestly. "To be the man my father raised me to be, and the man you need me to be. The man they deserve as a father." Olivia reached for his hand, her touch tentative, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. "I don't think those men are as different as you believe." He took her hand, engulfing it in his larger one. "Explain." "Your father raised you to be strong, to protect what's yours, to never show weakness," she said. "Those aren't bad qualities in a father, Dominic. It's how you apply them that matters." Marco began to fuss again, his tiny face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Without thinking, Dominic reached for him, lifting him carefully from Olivia's arms. The boy quieted almost immediately, staring up at his father with unfocused eyes. "He knows you," Olivia said, wonder in her voice. "Impossible," Dominic replied, though something in him wanted desperately to believe it. "Not impossible," she countered. "They heard your voice every day for months before they were born. I used to play the videos I had of you on my phone. Especially when I couldn't sleep." The admission stunned him. "You did?" She nodded, a faint blush coloring her pale cheeks. "I wanted them to know their father, even if things didn't work out between us." Dominic felt something unfamiliar constrict his throat, emotion he'd spent a lifetime suppressing suddenly too powerful to contain. He looked down at Marco, this tiny being who somehow knew him, who had been listening for his voice even before entering the world. "I don't deserve this," he said, the words barely audible. "Maybe not," Olivia agreed, her honesty as refreshing as it had always been. But they deserve you. The real you, Dominic. Not the mask you wear for the rest of the world. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed, still cradling Marco. I'm not sure I know who that is anymore. I do, she said simply. He's the man who walked out on the Russian Mafia to be with his children. The man who's holding his son like he's made of glass. The man who's terrified right now, not of his enemies or his rivals, but of failing the 4 people in this room. Her words stripped him bare, exposing truths he'd buried beneath layers of power and control. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since his father had placed the family business in his hands, Dominic Valenti felt vulnerable. I am terrified, he admitted, the confession like breaking through ice after being submerged too long. Not just of failing them, but of failing you. Again. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. You never failed me, Dominic. You just forgot to see me. To really see me. I see you now, he said, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. I see all of you. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Leo entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes widened slightly at the sight of his boss holding an infant. Sir, he said, there's a situation that requires your attention. Dominic felt the familiar pull of his other life, the empire that demanded his constant vigilance. But for the first time, that pull felt like a chain rather than a source of power. Handle it, he said, not looking away from Olivia and Marco. Leo hesitated. Sir, it's Sokolov. He's making moves in the Harbor District, claiming you've abandoned negotiations. 11 months ago, hell, 24 hours ago, those words would have sent Dominic rushing out, already calculating his countermove, already tasting blood. Now, they seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the weight of his son in his arms. Tell him, Dominic said slowly, that I'm taking a leave of absence for family matters. All current arrangements stand. Any attempts to exploit the situation will be met with the full force of the Valenti family. Leo's eyebrows shot up. A leave of absence, sir? Yes, Dominic confirmed, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Effective immediately and for the foreseeable future. And if he pushes? Dominic finally looked up, meeting his right-hand man's gaze. Then you have my authorization to respond appropriately. But make it clear, this isn't weakness. This is priority. Leo nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes as he glanced at the babies. Congratulations, sir. They're beautiful. After he left, Olivia stared at Dominic in disbelief. Did you just take paternity leave from the Mafia? A laugh escaped him, rusty from disuse but genuine. I suppose I did. Will that work? It has to, he said simply. Because I'm not missing another moment with them. Or with you, if you'll let me stay. Olivia's expression grew serious. It won't be easy, Dominic. I haven't forgotten why I left. I know, he acknowledged. And I'm not asking you to. I'm asking for a chance to show you, to show all of you, that I can be more than what my father made me. And if you can't, then I'll walk away, he promised, the words costing him everything but worth the price. From the business, from the family legacy. All of it. Shock registered on her face. You'd do that? For them? He looked at each of his children in turn, then back at Olivia. Yes. Without hesitation. She studied him, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Okay. Okay? We'll try, she clarified. Together. One day at a time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't even a promise of reconciliation. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. Dr. Patel arrived then, a petite woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. She reviewed Olivia's chart, examined each of the babies, and confirmed what the nurse had said earlier. Mrs. Valenti and Sophia can be discharged tomorrow morning, she told Dominic. The boys will need to stay another 48 hours for monitoring, but they're doing remarkably well for triplets. And if I wanted to arrange for private care? Dominic asked. At our home? Dr. Patel frowned. I wouldn't recommend moving the boys so soon. What if the care came to them? He pressed. A fully equipped medical suite, private nurses, yourself if you're available? The doctor's eyebrows rose. That would be unusual. But possible? She hesitated, then nodded. With the right equipment and staff, yes. But it would be expensive. Money isn't an issue, Dominic assured her. Security is. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Everyone in the city knew the Valenti name, even if they pretended not to. I see. Let me make some calls, see what can be arranged. After she left, Olivia shook her head in fond exasperation. Some things never change. Some things shouldn't, he replied, unrepentant. Protecting my family will always be my priority. The difference is, now I understand that protection means more than just physical safety. He carefully placed Marco back in Olivia's arms, then moved to check on Sophia and Gabriel. Both were sleeping peacefully, perfect in their innocence, unaware of the profound change they had already worked in their father's heart. What happens now? Olivia asked, voicing the question that hung between them. Dominic turned to her, allowing her to see everything he usually kept hidden, the fear, the hope, the love that had never died despite their separation. Now we build something new, he said. Something that honors what matters most. And what's that? Family, he replied. Not the Valenti family with its codes and obligations and blood debts. Our family. Yours and mine and theirs. Built on choice, not control. Olivia's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I'd like that. Dominic Valenti, who had never surrendered to anyone, found himself willingly conquered by 3 tiny miracles and the woman brave enough to show him a different kind of strength. As Sophia's tiny hand maintained its grip on his finger, he made a silent vow to these 4 people who had changed everything. He would build them a world where they could be safe without being confined, protected without being controlled. A world where they would never doubt they were loved for exactly who they were. It would be his greatest challenge. His most important work. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Valenti was certain he was fighting the right war. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Serafina's Stories for more tales about love, redemption, and the moments that change us forever. Remember, sometimes the strongest people are those who find the courage to put love before power, and family before legacy. Share in the comments a moment when someone's love changed your perspective on what truly matters in life.